On my first day of college, my parents told me, "We can't pay for school anymore. Can you find a husband instead?" What? I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I'd spent the whole day falling in love with my classes. Introduction to Psychology, where the professor made us laugh while explaining Freud. Creative Writing, where we'd already started working on short stories. Even Statistics seemed interesting with the right teacher. I was sitting on a bench outside the library feeling like my life was finally beginning when they called. My mom's voice was oddly cheerful for someone destroying my future. "We need you to listen carefully, honey. We can't pay for school anymore. What happened to the college savings account you've had for me since I was a baby?" My voice cracked. They'd shown me the statements every birthday. Watched the numbers grow. Used it as motivation when I didn't want to study for the SATs. That money was supposed to be sacred. Untouchable. Mine. There was a pause before my dad cleared his throat. "I had some problems. We're going to need all the money back to pay some debts." Which was weird because she didn't say what kind of debts. Then what am I supposed to do? I felt like I might throw up. My mom jumped back in with her solution. "You need to find a rich boyfriend by the end of the month. You go to school with plenty of wealthy students and you have a good body, so it wouldn't be impossible for you to get a boyfriend to turn into a husband." I sat there stunned while she kept talking. She explained their whole plan like she'd thought it through carefully. How I should target guys in the business school. How I should dress more revealing. How I should laugh at their jokes even if they weren't funny. "If you just don't break up with him even if he cheats on you, then in 7 years you can go back to school again." She said it like 7 years was nothing. Unable to believe what was going on, I hung up without saying goodbye. My hands were shaking as I scrolled to my brother Jerry's number. He'd graduated from law school last year and always knew how to fix things. He picked up on the second ring. "They just told me they can't pay for college and I need to find a rich husband. Is this really happening?" I was trying not to cry. Jerry let out a long sigh. "They did the same thing to me when I started college and I believed them." What? This kept getting worse. He explained how 8 years ago they'd called him with the same story. Same weird debts. Same crazy solution. But he'd been too proud to marry for money, so he'd dropped out instead. Started working as a welder to save up. Spent years breathing in fumes and burning his hands just so he could eventually pay for law school himself. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. I thought maybe they'd changed. Maybe they'd learned. I kept hoping they weren't going to do it to you too. His voice was bitter. We sat in silence for a moment. I watched other students walking by with their backpacks and coffee cups, living normal college lives, not being told to sell themselves to the highest bidder by their own parents. "There's something else you need to know," Jerry said finally. "Our parents have ties with the mafia." The mafia? Like the actual mafia? This was insane. Dad's gambling wasn't at casinos. He owes money to some very dangerous people. That's why they need your college fund. That's why they're desperate enough to suggest this husband thing. My brain couldn't process this information. My parents, who drove a minivan and went to church on Sundays, were mixed up with organized crime. My dad, who wore polo shirts and told bad jokes, owed money to actual criminals. "So what do we do?" I asked. Jerry's voice got quiet like he was making sure no one could overhear. "I have a plan to get your money back. But it's going to take both of us and you have to trust me completely." "What kind of plan?" I needed details. "Not over the phone. Can you drive home this weekend? We'll meet at my apartment and I'll explain everything. Just whatever you do, don't let Mom and Dad know we talked. Act like you're considering their marriage plan." "Jerry, you're scaring me." "Good. You should be scared. These people don't mess around. But I'm not letting them steal your future like they stole mine. We're going to fix this." I ended the call and sat there on the bench for another minute, my whole body shaking. Students kept walking past me like nothing had changed, but everything was different now. My legs felt weak when I finally stood up and walked back to my dorm. The building felt too bright and too loud with everyone getting ready for Friday night parties. I made it to my room and closed the door behind me, then sat at my desk and opened my laptop. My class schedule stared back at me from the screen. Introduction to Psychology on Mondays and Wednesdays. Creative Writing on Tuesdays and Thursdays. Statistics 3 times a week. Classes I might not get to finish because my parents owed money to actual criminals. My hands were still shaking as I grabbed my phone and started deleting everything. Call history with Mom and Dad gone. Text messages gone. I changed all my passwords one by one, making them longer and more random. My email password, my banking password, everything. Setting up a new email account took forever because I kept hitting the wrong keys. My fingers wouldn't work right. Jerry had told me to download Signal for messaging, so I found it in the App Store and set it up with a username instead of my phone number. I sent him a message saying I'd drive to see him tomorrow, and he sent back a thumbs up. Then my regular email pinged with a new message. The bursar's office reminding me that tuition was due in 3 weeks. $28,000 for the semester. Money my parents had saved for 18 years and then stolen to pay criminals. I stared at the number and felt sick. I forwarded it to my new secure email and deleted it from my regular inbox. My roommate came in around midnight, drunk and giggling about some party. She passed out in her bed while I lay there staring at the ceiling. Down the hall, I could hear people laughing and talking about normal stuff. Someone was complaining about a chemistry test. Someone else was talking about asking a girl out. They were worried about regular college problems while I was planning to secretly record my own parents. I felt completely alone, even though there were hundreds of people in this building. I must have dozed off at some point because my alarm went off at 7. My roommate was still passed out, so I moved quietly, pulling out the small suitcase from under my bed. I packed the folder I'd been keeping since high school with all my college savings documents. Every birthday they'd shown me the statements and I'd kept copies. Screenshots of their texts promising the money was mine. Photos of them at my high school graduation saying how proud they were that I'd earned a full ride to my safety school. But they wanted me to go to my dream school instead. Everything that proved that money existed and was meant for me. I texted Jerry on Signal that I was leaving at noon like we planned. My roommate stirred and asked where I was going. I told her I was visiting family for the weekend and she mumbled something about having fun before falling back asleep. I threw some clothes in the bag too and headed out to my car. The drive to Jerry's apartment usually took 2 hours, but I kept checking my mirrors. About 30 minutes in, I noticed a dark sedan that had been behind me since I left campus. Not right behind me, but staying steady 3 or 4 cars back. When I changed lanes, it changed lanes. When I took the exit for Route 95, it took the same exit. My heart started pounding. I memorized the license plate and took an unexpected exit for a rest stop. The sedan followed. I pulled into the rest stop and parked near the building, watching as the sedan parked a few rows away. Nobody got out. I called Jerry, trying to keep my voice steady. He told me to get back on the highway and keep driving to his place like everything was normal. He said not to try to lose them because that would let them know I'd noticed. So I got back in my car and drove the rest of the way with that sedan always 3 cars behind me. When I finally pulled up to Jerry's apartment building, the sedan drove past and turned at the next corner. I grabbed my bag and practically ran inside. Jerry was waiting at his door and pulled me into a hug the second he saw me. I hadn't cried yet, but suddenly I couldn't stop. He held me while I sobbed into his shirt, everything from the last day hitting me at once. When I finally calmed down, he led me to his kitchen where he'd covered the whole table with papers. Bank statements, printed emails, photos of documents. He'd been collecting evidence about our parents for months, maybe years. We spread everything out and started organizing it by date. Jerry showed me his laptop where he'd made a spreadsheet tracking every deposit and withdrawal from my college account. The withdrawals matched up with dates he'd marked in red on a calendar. He explained his plan while we sorted papers. Document everything, record conversations, build a legal case. He pulled out a recording app on his phone and showed me how to use it. Then he gave me a tiny microphone that clipped inside my jacket collar, barely visible. We practiced turning it on and off until I could do it without looking. He'd written down contact information for 2 people who could help us. Margot Goodwin worked in financial aid at my school and had experience with emergency situations. Hayden Barlow was a detective who specialized in organized crime cases, and Jerry knew him from when he'd done some legal work for the police department. Having actual names of people who could help made everything feel less impossible. That evening, after we'd organized everything and made copies, Jerry had me sit across from him at the table. He pretended to be our parents while I practiced staying calm and asking the right questions. We went through it over and over, him teaching me what words to use to get legally useful answers. Sunday morning, I woke up on Jerry's couch with my neck stiff from the weird angle and pulled out my phone to search for the financial aid office number at the school. The website said they opened at 8 on Monday, but I found an email for someone named Margot Goodwin who handled emergency cases, so I typed out a message explaining I had a family financial crisis and needed help right away. My hands shook as I typed because putting it in writing made everything more real, and I had to delete and rewrite the email 3 times before it sounded normal enough. Jerry came out of his bedroom with coffee and sat next to me while I attached copies of all the bank statements we'd organized, showing the college fund existed and was meant for me. He helped me write a short summary that explained my parents took the money without mentioning anything about the mafia or gambling debts, since that would sound too crazy for a first email. Within an hour, Margot wrote back saying she could meet me Monday at 7:30 before regular office hours, which meant I'd have to leave campus super early, but at least I'd get help. I packed up all the documents in a folder and drove back to campus that afternoon with Jerry following me for the first 30 minutes to make sure nobody was tailing me this time. Back in my dorm room Sunday night, I sat on my bed staring at my phone for 10 minutes before finally texting Mom that I'd been thinking about what she said and wanted to understand more about finding a boyfriend. She called immediately, and her voice got all excited like I'd just told her I won the lottery or something, while she started listing all these instructions about which dining halls the business school guys ate at and what times they went to the gym. I turned on the recording app Jerry showed me and held the phone slightly away from my ear, so the microphone would pick up everything while she explained I should wear tighter clothes and laugh more even if nothing was funny. She kept going for 20 minutes about how I should pretend to be interested in whatever they talked about and never argue with them about anything, and always let them think they were smarter than me. Then she mentioned something that made my stomach drop when she said Dad's friend Alessandro knew some rich families with sons my age who might be interested in meeting me. She said his name so casual, like he was just some normal family friend instead of a criminal my dad owed money to, and I had to bite my tongue to keep from saying something. I asked who Alessandro was, and she said he was someone Dad did business with sometimes, and he had connections to wealthy people who might help our family situation. The way she talked about him like he was doing us a favor instead of threatening us made me want to scream, but I kept my voice steady and asked more questions about these families he knew. She said Alessandro could arrange introductions if I was serious about this plan, and I told her I'd think about it while fighting the urge to throw my phone across the room. After we hung up, I saved the recording and took screenshots of her text listing all the ways I should change myself to catch a rich husband. Monday morning, my alarm went off at 6, and I threw on clothes and grabbed the folder of documents before walking across campus in the dark to the financial aid building. Margot was already there unlocking her office, and she looked exactly like her photo on the website, with gray hair pulled back and glasses on a chain around her neck. She sat me down and spread out all my documents on her desk, while making notes on a yellow pad and asking questions about when the money disappeared and how much was in the account originally. Her face got more concerned as she reviewed everything, and she explained that emergency grants existed for unusual situations, but they needed proof of real hardship beyond just parents refusing to pay. She said a police report would make my case much stronger since it would show this wasn't just a family disagreement, but actual theft of money that belonged to me. I realized I'd have to make everything official and involve the police if I wanted any chance of staying in the school, which meant no more pretending this would just go away. After the meeting, I called Jerry from outside the building and told him what Margot said about needing a police report to get emergency funding. He said he'd call his contact right away, and within an hour he texted that Detective Hayden Barlow agreed to meet us unofficially first to discuss our options. We set up a meeting for Tuesday at a coffee shop near campus where we could talk without anyone overhearing, and Hayden could explain what getting the police involved would really mean. That night, Mom started texting me photos of dresses she found online that she thought would help me attract rich boys, and each one showed more skin than the last. She included tips with each photo like, "This one shows your figure," and "Boys like when you show your legs," and I wanted to throw up reading them, but I screenshot everything for evidence. I texted back with fake enthusiasm, saying the dresses looked nice, and asking where I should shop for them while building my file of how my own mother was pushing me to basically sell myself. Tuesday morning, I met Hayden at the coffee shop, and he looked like a normal guy in jeans and a button-down shirt, instead of a cop uniform, which helped me relax a little. He explained the legal process for reporting financial crimes, and how involving mafia connections made everything more complicated, but also more serious from a law enforcement perspective. He offered to help us file what he called a controlled report that would get us a case number for the financial aid office without immediately triggering arrests or alerting my parents that we'd gone to the police. His calm way of explaining everything made me feel safer, even though he kept warning me about the real dangers of dealing with organized crime people. He said we could set up official recording equipment for my next call with my parents and coached me on what questions would help build a legal case without making them suspicious. He warned me never to meet with anyone connected to Alessandro without police backup, because these weren't people who made empty threats, and the danger was completely real. That evening, I had to go to a business school mixer to keep up my cover story with my parents, and I asked Izzy from down the hall to come with me as moral support. She didn't know the whole story, but I told her I needed a wingman for an awkward social thing, and she agreed right away because that's the kind of friend she was. The mixer was in the business school lounge, and the room was full of guys in blazers talking about internships and startup ideas, while I stood there in one of my normal dresses feeling completely out of place. I forced myself to talk to a few of them and laugh at their jokes about market volatility or whatever, while Izzy made faces at me from across the room to keep me from losing it completely. Wednesday morning, Hayden came to campus with a van full of recording equipment and set everything up in an empty office the campus police let us use. He showed me how the system worked and explained that everything would be legally admissible in court if we needed it later for evidence against my parents or Alessandro. He gave me a list of questions to work into the conversation naturally and reminded me to stay calm no matter what my parents said, because getting emotional would make them suspicious. I called Mom at exactly 2 o'clock while Hayden monitored everything from his laptop and asked about the timeline for finding a husband and what would happen with my tuition if I didn't find someone fast enough. She admitted Dad needed the money urgently for his debts, and when I pushed for details, she used the word consequences, which made Hayden nod and write something down, because that was the kind of language that showed actual threats existed. Dad cleared his throat and took the phone from Mom, his voice shaking slightly as he started talking about the timeline for getting money. He said they needed at least half by next week or else Sandra would. Then he caught himself and quickly said some people would be upset if payments didn't start soon. Hayden's eyes got wide and he started typing fast on his laptop while pointing at me to keep Dad talking. I asked Dad who Sandra was, playing dumb, and he stammered something about just meeting some people he knew from work, before changing the subject back to me finding a boyfriend. My hands were shaking as I asked more questions about these people and their payment expectations, while Hayden recorded everything and took notes about the name slip. Dad kept talking himself into corners, mentioning specific amounts and dates that matched what Jerry had found in their bank records. After 20 more minutes of getting them to admit details about the debt and their plan for me, I finally hung up and just sat there staring at Hayden's equipment. He played back the recording to make sure we got everything clear, especially the part where Dad said Sandro's name, which short for Alessandro. Thursday morning came too fast, and I met Hayden at the police station downtown at 8 o'clock sharp. The building smelled like old coffee and floor cleaner, and there were people waiting on plastic chairs looking tired and worried. Hayden walked me through filling out the official report, helping me write down everything about the stolen college fund and the threats from my parents' creditors. The officer taking the report kept asking me to repeat parts like she couldn't believe parents would do this to their kid. It took 3 hours to get through all the paperwork and questions, with Hayden staying beside me the whole time to make sure everything got documented right. When they finally gave me the case number, a long string of digits that made everything feel more real, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. The reality of reporting my own parents to the police hit me hard as we walked out of the station into the bright morning sun. Hayden put his hand on my shoulder and reminded me this was about protecting myself from dangerous people, not about punishing my parents for bad choices. I drove straight to the financial aid office with the case number and found Margot already waiting for me with a stack of forms. She'd cleared her whole morning to help me and had already started the emergency grant paperwork based on our earlier meeting. She entered the case number into the system and explained how it would fast-track my application through the Special Circumstances Committee. The grant would only cover about 60% of this semester's tuition, but combined with a payment plan and campus job, I could stay enrolled. For the first time since that phone call on the bench, I felt a tiny bit of hope that maybe I wouldn't have to drop out. Margot made copies of everything and gave me a folder with all my documents, telling me to keep it somewhere safe. That afternoon, my phone rang while I was trying to study in my dorm room, and Mom's cheerful voice made my stomach drop. She said Alessandro wanted to meet with me to discuss options for our family's situation, like he was some helpful family friend instead of a criminal. She kept saying how generous he was being, willing to talk about different arrangements, but I could hear the fear under her fake happiness. I texted Hayden immediately while still on the phone with Mom, and he replied within seconds that we needed to control this meeting. Mom said Alessandro suggested Saturday at a coffee shop downtown, somewhere public and safe, which almost made me laugh at how wrong safe was. After hanging up, Hayden called and started planning how to wire me up and position undercover officers around the coffee shop. Meanwhile, Jerry was working on his own angle, spending Thursday night writing up a legal document for our parents to sign. He emailed me a draft that basically said they acknowledged taking my college fund without permission and owed me the full amount plus interest. We both knew they'd never sign it willingly, but Jerry said we had to try the civil route first before things got more complicated. He was building multiple legal strategies at once, preparing for whatever direction this mess might go. Friday morning, Hayden met me at a different coffee shop to go over the plan for meeting Alessandro the next day. He showed me the tiny microphone that would clip inside my jacket and the recording device that looked like a phone charger. He had me practice walking and sitting naturally while wearing the wire, making sure it wouldn't show or make noise. He explained exactly where the undercover officers would be positioned and showed me photos of them, so I'd know who was there to protect me. He'd be watching from across the street with binoculars and a radio to coordinate everyone if something went wrong. The goal was simple, but terrifying: get Alessandro to admit to the debt and threats on tape without making him suspicious. That night, I sat at my desk trying to eat the sandwich I'd bought for dinner, but my stomach wouldn't accept food. The idea of meeting an actual mafia member tomorrow made everything feel unreal and dangerous, in a way I'd never experienced. Izzy knocked on my door around 9, noticing I'd been quiet all day, and asked if I was okay. She brought a container of soup from the dining hall and sat on my bed while I pretended to study at my desk. She didn't push for details about what was wrong, just kept me company and talked about her own classes and drama with her roommate. Her quiet support helped more than she knew, even though I couldn't tell her why I was really scared. Saturday morning, I woke up at 5 and couldn't go back to sleep, just lying there thinking about what might happen. I got dressed in the outfit Hayden had approved, making sure the wire was secure and invisible under my jacket. The coffee shop was only a 10-minute walk from campus, but it felt like the longest walk of my life. I got there 20 minutes early and ordered a small coffee with hands that shook so bad I dropped my change. I picked a table by the window like Hayden had instructed and tried to look normal while my heart pounded. Alessandro arrived exactly on time, looking like any other middle-aged businessman in khakis and a polo shirt. He smiled warmly and shook my hand like we were having a normal business meeting, then ordered a black coffee before sitting across from me. He was polite and even charming as he explained that my father owed him significant money from gambling over the past 2 years. He pulled out a small notebook and showed me figures, dates, and payment records that made my stomach turn. He never raised his voice or made explicit threats, but when he mentioned how family problems can affect everyone, he looked directly at me with cold eyes that made his meaning clear. He talked about creative solutions and mentioned that smart young women who understood family obligations could help restructure difficult debts. When I asked what he meant by restructure, he smiled and said that certain social arrangements could offset financial obligations significantly. He actually suggested that if I was smart about marriage to the right family, my father's debt could be considered differently. Then he mentioned that all the payments had been processed through Powell Credit Union, giving us the paper trail Hayden wanted. I nodded and tried to look interested while feeling sick, knowing the wire was catching every disgusting word about basically selling me to clear Dad's gambling debt. Alessandro finished his coffee and stood up, saying he'd give our family time to consider the options he'd presented. After he left, I sat there for 5 more minutes like Hayden had told me, then walked out trying to look calm. The same dark sedan I'd noticed before was parked across the street with someone sitting inside watching the coffee shop. I walked back to campus taking the route Hayden had mapped out, and he called me 10 minutes later confirming they'd seen the sedan too. He said they were increasing security measures immediately and would have someone watching my dorm. The reality that actual criminals were tracking my movements and knew where I lived made everything feel more dangerous than I'd imagined possible. Sunday dragged by with me checking my phone every few minutes and jumping at every noise outside my dorm room. Monday morning, I drove to Powell Credit Union with the account numbers Jerry had given me, hoping to get transaction records that would prove Dad took my college money for his gambling debts. The building was one of those small branches in a strip mall between a nail salon and a sandwich shop. I walked up to the teller window and explained I needed copies of withdrawals from my college savings account, sliding my ID across the counter. The teller, a woman in her 40s with kind eyes, typed on her computer for a minute before frowning. She said privacy laws meant she couldn't give me any information without being on the account or having a court order, even though she could see my name was connected to it somehow. I asked if there was any way around it, but she shook her head, looking genuinely sorry as she explained that federal banking regulations were strict about this stuff. I left empty-handed and called Hayden from my car, telling him what happened. He said he'd start the paperwork for a subpoena right away, while Jerry would look into civil legal options for getting the records. That afternoon, Jerry drove to our parents' house with a document he'd drawn up acknowledging they'd taken my college fund and owed me the money. I waited in my dorm room for his call, pacing back and forth between my desk and bed. When he finally called 2 hours later, his voice was tight with anger. He said Dad had laughed at the paper and refused to sign it, calling us dramatic and ungrateful after everything they'd done for us. Mom had started crying during the argument, saying we were tearing the family apart over money. Then something unexpected happened that changed everything. Jerry said Mom suddenly stood up and went to their bedroom, coming back with a small black notebook she'd been hiding in her dresser. She threw it on the table and broke down completely, admitting she'd been tracking every single bet Dad made, every loss to Alessandro, every payment they'd made using my college money. The notebook had dates going back 2 years with amounts that got bigger and bigger as Dad got deeper into debt. Mom had written down phone numbers, meeting locations, even license plate numbers of cars that came to their house for collections. She'd known the whole time but felt trapped and scared, watching Dad spiral while Alessandro's demands got worse. Jerry took photos of every page while Mom sobbed and Dad yelled at her for betraying him. The entries matched exactly with the dates and amounts withdrawn from my college account, creating a perfect paper trail from my savings to Alessandro's pocket. Some entries had notes like, used Sarah's money, or took from college fund, that made it impossible to deny what they'd done. Tuesday morning, I met with Margot in the financial aid office, handing her copies of the ledger pages Jerry had sent me. She reviewed them carefully, her expression getting more serious with each page she read. She said this was exactly the kind of evidence that would qualify me for maximum emergency aid, since it proved criminal theft of education funds. She made copies for my file and called over a colleague who specialized in helping crime victims navigate the university system. The woman introduced herself as a campus advocate and explained she could help coordinate between the police investigation, the financial aid office, and my professors if I needed extensions or accommodations. For the first time since this started, I felt like the school was completely on my side and working to keep me enrolled. That night, I was studying in my room when Jerry called, his voice shaking. Someone had slashed all 4 tires on his car and left a note under the windshield that said, "Family pays family debts," in block letters. He'd already called the police to file a report, and they were treating it as witness intimidation connected to our case against Alessandro. Hayden arrived within an hour and said we needed to move to a safe location immediately. He drove us to a small apartment building on the other side of town that the police used for witnesses who needed protection. The apartment was basic but clean, with 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen, and bars on all the windows. Hayden showed us the security system and gave us a number to call that would have officers there in under 3 minutes. Wednesday morning, Hayden picked me up early to prepare for another recorded meeting with Alessandro, where I was supposed to give him a partial payment to buy time. The real goal was to get him to be more explicit about his threats and criminal activity, since the first recording hadn't been clear enough for strong charges. We spent 2 hours in a conference room at the police station practicing different approaches and responses. Hayden coached me on how to ask questions that sounded naive, but would prompt Alessandro to explain his illegal operations. I practiced staying calm even when Hayden pretended to threaten me, learning to control my breathing and keep my hands steady. The meeting was set for that afternoon at a different coffee shop, this one closer to campus where there would be more witnesses. I arrived 10 minutes early wearing the wire again, ordering a small tea that I didn't really want. Alessandro showed up right on time, sitting down across from me with the same fake friendly smile. I pulled out an envelope with $500 Hayden had given me from evidence funds, sliding it across the table while asking for a receipt. Alessandro laughed and said they don't do paperwork in his business. that receipts create problems for everyone involved. I played dumb and asked how I could prove I'd made a payment without documentation. He leaned forward and explained that his business worked on trust and reputation, mentioning he had ways of collecting from families who didn't cooperate, that didn't involve courts or paperwork. When I asked what kind of ways, he smiled and said creative solutions worked best, that sometimes people needed motivation beyond money to pay their debts. He mentioned that accidents happened to people who didn't take their obligations seriously, that family members could find themselves in difficult situations. I nodded and asked if my dad's debt would affect my brother or me directly. Alessandro said family debts were family problems, and everyone contributed to solutions one way or another. After he left with the money, I sat there for 5 more minutes like before, then walked back to the safe house where Hayden was waiting. He said Alessandro's comments about accidents and family members facing consequences were exactly what they needed for criminal threat charges. Thursday morning, we all went to the courthouse where Jerry's lawyer presented our evidence to a judge requesting an emergency order. The judge reviewed the ledger, the police reports and transcripts of the recorded conversations with Alessandro. After an hour of arguments from both sides, she granted a temporary restraining order freezing my parents' remaining assets while the criminal case was investigated. This meant they couldn't sell the house, empty bank accounts, or transfer any property until the court decided what they owed me. My phone started ringing immediately with calls from both parents that I didn't answer. Jerry handled all communication through his lawyer now, keeping everything official and documented. Friday morning, Mom's lawyer contacted Jerry's lawyer with an offer to cooperate with the police investigation in exchange for leniency on any charges she might face. She provided a list of phone numbers Alessandro used, addresses where Dad met him to gamble, and names of other people Dad owed money to from card games. She even gave them dates and times of upcoming games Dad was planning to attend, trying to win back what he'd lost. Her betrayal of Dad felt inevitable, but still sad, watching my family completely fall apart over his addiction and their crimes. That afternoon, I sat in the financial aid office as Margot processed my emergency aid application, with all the supporting documentation. The computer system showed approval for enough money to cover this semester's tuition with a payment plan for the rest of my degree. She printed out the confirmation and walked me over to the bursar's office where they removed the hold on my account. I could officially stay in the school even though money would be tight and I'd need to work more hours. Walking out of the administration building with my enrollment secured felt like winning a battle in a war that wasn't over yet. Saturday morning, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. The message said, "Disappointed in your family's choices," with a photo attached. I opened it and my blood went cold. It was a picture of my dorm building taken from across the quad. I immediately called Hayden, who told me to forward everything and not respond. He logged it as evidence and said he'd have an undercover officer on campus by noon. The threat felt real, but at least I wasn't facing it alone. Jerry drove up that afternoon and we spent the whole weekend working with a lawyer he knew from his firm. We sat at his kitchen table going through every document while the lawyer took notes. He suggested we propose a settlement where Alessandro would get part of the frozen assets if he agreed the debt was paid, and signed a no-contact order. It wasn't justice, but it might buy us safety. The lawyer typed up the offer on his laptop and sent it to Alessandro's lawyer Sunday night. We didn't expect a quick response, but Tuesday morning the reply came through. Alessandro's lawyer agreed to negotiate but wanted 70% of the frozen assets. Hayden said this was actually good news when I called him panicking. It meant Alessandro wanted to avoid a full investigation too. The lawyer countered with 50% and added a formal no-contact agreement that would make any future threats a crime. Wednesday's negotiation meeting took place at the lawyer's office downtown. I sat between Jerry and Hayden while Alessandro sat across the conference table with his lawyer. Nobody shook hands. Alessandro looked smaller in the fluorescent lights than he had at the coffee shop. His lawyer did most of the talking while Alessandro just nodded. After 2 hours of back and forth, they agreed to 60% of the frozen assets paid through official channels. This would create a paper trail the government could track. Alessandro signed the no-contact order right there in front of us. Any future contact would be prosecutable. Thursday morning, I went to the bursar's office with my emergency grant paperwork. The woman behind the desk processed the deposit and helped me set up a payment plan for what was left. I'd need to pay $200 a month, which meant getting a job. She mentioned the library was hiring and gave me the supervisor's number. I called right away and got an interview for that afternoon. The library job paid minimum wage but offered flexible hours around classes. My boss understood I'd need time off for legal stuff and said that was fine. Friday's preliminary hearing happened at the courthouse downtown. My parents sat at a different table with their lawyer while the judge reviewed everything. Dad looked like he'd aged 10 years in the past month. Mom kept her eyes down the whole time. The judge ordered them to sign a lien against their house to secure my claim to the stolen funds. This meant if they sold the house, I'd get my college money first. Dad's hand shook as he signed the papers. Mom seemed almost relieved it was becoming official. They had to acknowledge what they did in legal terms right there in court. The following week started their required treatment programs. Both parents had to attend Gamblers Anonymous meetings as part of their plea agreement. Dad went to meetings every Tuesday and Thursday night. Mom had to go to family counseling sessions for people who enabled addicts. The court would check their attendance records monthly. Dad finally admitted he had a problem with gambling after years of denying it. Mom had to confront how she'd helped hide his addiction and made excuses for him. It was the first step toward them taking responsibility. Wednesday afternoon, Hayden called with unexpected news. Alessandro had been arrested during a traffic stop the night before. The cops found illegal stuff in his car, and our evidence added to his problems. He'd be dealing with his own court cases for months, which meant he was too busy to bother us. The immediate danger finally felt like it was passing. My parents' lawyer reached out to Jerry with a proposal about communication going forward. They suggested written updates only with no direct contact for now. Any future relationship would depend on them completing their treatment program successfully. The lawyer said they understood if I needed space to heal. I agreed to the terms because I needed time to process everything. Jerry supported whatever I decided and said there was no rush to forgive them. Thursday, I went to the registrar's office to reduce my course load for the rest of the semester. Dropping from 5 classes to 4 would help me manage the stress better. It meant graduating a semester late, but that seemed small compared to everything else. The advisor understood and helped me pick which class to drop. I kept psychology, creative writing, and statistics, but dropped my elective. This gave me more hours for the library job, which I needed for the payment plan. The routine of shelving books felt normal and safe after all the chaos. My supervisor was a quiet woman who didn't ask personal questions. She showed me the system for organizing returns and left me alone to work. Other students came and went without knowing my story. I helped them find books and checked out materials like any other student worker. The normal routine of scanning barcodes and pushing the book cart between stacks felt like the most peaceful thing in my life. Friday afternoon, Jerry called while I was sorting returns and told me he'd decided to take the bar exam again next month since he'd put everything on hold to help me with this mess. He asked if I could help him study, and I said yes right away, because helping each other felt like the only good thing happening. We set up a schedule where I'd quiz him on legal terms during my library breaks, and he'd help me with homework over video calls in the evenings. I made flashcards from his old bar prep materials, and we'd go through them together, him answering questions while I checked the answers. The routine gave us both something normal to focus on besides lawyers and court dates and wondering if our parents would ever be okay again. 3 weeks went by with this new pattern, and I finally moved back to campus housing with a new roommate who didn't know anything about what happened. The girl seemed nice enough and kept to herself mostly, which worked for me since I wasn't ready to explain why I sometimes woke up panicking about money. Izzy came over to help me unpack and hang up posters, trying to make the room feel normal even though nothing really was. She brought string lights and helped me arrange my desk the way I liked it, not asking too many questions when I got quiet. I'd started seeing a counselor at Student Health Services twice a week to deal with everything, and she kept telling me healing wasn't going to be quick or easy. The counselor gave me breathing exercises for when the panic hit and helped me understand that what my parents did wasn't my fault, even though it felt like it sometimes. That same week, I went back to the bursar's office where they finalized my payment plan with exact numbers I could handle. $200 a month from my library job plus a small loan would cover everything, though it meant I'd graduate a semester late. The woman behind the desk printed out all the paperwork and highlighted the important parts, showing me how to set up automatic payments so I wouldn't miss any. Seeing it all official with stamps and signatures made me feel safer than I had in weeks, because now no one could take this away from me. My parents' lawyer sent a thick envelope to my dorm with a formal apology letter they'd written as part of their plea deal. I sat on my bed staring at it for 20 minutes before opening it, my hands shaking a little. They took responsibility for stealing my college fund, and said they were sorry for trying to make me marry someone for money, and for putting me in danger with their gambling debts. The letter went on for 3 pages with lots of legal language mixed in with their actual words. I read it once, then put it in a folder at the bottom of my desk drawer, not ready to forgive them, but noting they'd at least admitted what they did. Jerry and I talked about it that night, and agreed we'd think about contact again after they finished their treatment programs, but not before. My creative writing class became the place where I could finally use all this pain for something useful. The professor assigned us to write about a moment that changed us, and I wrote about sitting on that bench when my parents called. I didn't hold back, putting all the betrayal and fear and anger into the words, making it as real on the page as it felt in my life. When I read it in workshop, the room went completely quiet, and the professor called it powerful and authentic, saying trauma creates the most honest art. After class, 3 different students came up to me separately, sharing their own stories about parents who'd let them down or stolen from them, or chosen addiction over family. Hayden called the next morning with updates about the sentencing, explaining that Mom's cooperation with the investigation meant she got probation instead of jail time. Dad had to do mandatory treatment for gambling addiction, plus community service, but also avoided prison, which felt too easy even though Hayden said it was pretty standard for first-time financial crimes. I felt weird about them not going to jail, but also relieved because having parents in prison would be its own kind of hard. Hayden said the case was officially closed now, and Alessandro's organization was basically gone after his arrest, so we didn't need to worry about retaliation anymore. That weekend, Jerry drove down, and we went to the bank together to open a joint education savings account with both our names on it. We set it up so any withdrawal needed both signatures, and monthly statements went to both our emails, making everything transparent. We each put in $50 to start, which wasn't much but felt important as a symbol of rebuilding what got stolen. Every month we'd add whatever we could afford. Him from his new job once he passed the bar, and me from library wages after paying my bills. A month after everything started, I found myself walking past that same bench outside the library where I'd gotten the call. The same students walked by with their coffee and backpacks, worried about tests and dating and normal college problems, while I stood there feeling like a different person than the girl who'd sat there before. I called Jerry right then just to hear his voice, standing in the exact spot where this all began, reminding myself I wasn't alone anymore, and never would be again. We kept all our safety stuff in place even though the danger had passed because being careful had become habit. New phones with new numbers, checking in with each other daily, staying aware of who was around us, meeting in public places when we had to see lawyers or sign papers. Hayden called once a month to make sure nothing new had come up, and to remind us we could call him if anything felt wrong. 6 weeks from that first phone call, my life had found a new rhythm that almost felt normal. 2 months passed with me working extra shifts at the library and studying harder than ever before. Jerry called one Thursday afternoon while I was shelving books to tell me he'd gotten his bar exam results in the mail. He'd passed on his second try to already had 3 interviews lined up at different firms. The next week, he started at a place that handled financial crimes and fraud cases. He texted me photos of his new office with its view of the parking lot and said our family mess had taught him more than any textbook. I felt proud seeing him in his suit and tie after everything he'd been through to get there. My own grades started climbing once I could focus on the school instead of survival. The statistics professor pulled me aside after class to say my test scores had improved by 30%. In creative writing, I turned in a story about trust that made the whole workshop go quiet when I read it. My psychology essays got comments like insightful and well-researched, instead of the rushed work from before. By finals week, I was pulling all-nighters in the library for normal reasons like everyone else. The grades posted right before winter break, and I'd made the dean's list with a 3.8 GPA. I screenshot the email and sent it to Jerry, who replied with 5 exclamation points. Hayden called that same week with news about Alessandro's organization falling apart. The arrest had scared off most of his crew, and the rest were laying low or leaving town. He'd been checking with his contacts, and nobody was talking about our family anymore. The whole operation just dried up once Alessandro got locked up and his lawyers got busy with bigger problems. I could finally stop looking over my shoulder every time I walked to class. Spring registration opened, and I signed up for Introduction to Law along with my other requirements. The pre-law advisor helped me plan out the next 3 years to meet all the requirements for law school applications. Jerry sent me his old LSAT prep books and highlighted which professors to take for the best recommendations. We talked every Sunday about different areas of law and what kind of lawyer I might want to be. He promised to help me study for the LSAT when the time came and said I'd do better than he did. 3 weeks into spring semester, a letter arrived from Mom through her treatment center. The envelope had my name written in her shaky handwriting and felt thin between my fingers. Inside, she'd written 2 pages about completing her program and understanding what she'd done wrong. She asked if maybe we could meet for coffee sometime when I felt ready, but said she'd understand if I never wanted to see her again. At the bottom, she'd added that Dad was doing better too, and hadn't placed a bet in 5 months. I folded the letter carefully and put it in my desk drawer under my notebooks. Maybe someday I'd be ready to have that coffee, but not yet. Izzy noticed me being quiet that night and brought over cookies from the dining hall. We sat on my bed and I finally told her everything from the beginning. About the phone call and the marriage plan and the mafia and recording my parents and everything with Alessandro. She listened without interrupting, even when her eyes got wide at the dangerous parts. When I finished, she hugged me and said she'd suspected something bad was happening, but never imagined all that. She admitted she'd been worried when I kept disappearing and seemed so stressed but didn't know how to help. Having someone who knew the whole truth but still treated me normal felt better than I expected. We started having weekly coffee dates where I could talk about the legal stuff or family drama without explaining the backstory. Summer came and went with me working full-time at the library and taking 2 online classes to catch up on credits. Jerry helped me find a cheaper apartment near campus that I could afford with my library wages and financial aid. We painted it together over a weekend and he installed extra locks on all the windows. By August, I'd saved enough for the next semester and felt stable for the first time in almost a year. When sophomore year started, I walked onto campus feeling different from the scared girl from last fall. My backpack held books I'd bought myself with money I'd earned through honest work. The pre-law classes were hard but interesting, and my professors knew me by name. I had a regular study group and friends who invited me to parties, and nobody trying to marry me off for money. Jerry and I talked every week about his cases and my classes, and sometimes even normal stuff like movies or sports. My parents stayed in their programs and sent updates through their lawyers but kept their distance like we'd agreed. The campus felt safe and familiar as I walked the paths I'd been terrified on just 12 months ago. Standing outside the library where everything started, I felt genuinely happy and free from anyone else's plans for my life. Thanks for sticking with me through all these strange twists and turns today. Definitely made it more interesting sharing the questions together. Like the video, it helps more than you think.